Hello, YouTubers. This is Gold Standard 0924 coming at you with a Wrestling Reimagining series for you guys today. So, we're going to continue our WCW 1998 fantasy rebooking, and we're just getting closer to the end, as a matter of fact. So, in this video, I'll be tackling the October pay per view Halloween Havoc. Halloween Havoc was WCW's pay per view events of the calendar year alongside Super Brawl, Great American Bash, Bash at the Beach, and Starrcade. So, really trying to pull out all the stops for this October pay per view. Booked about 9 matches on the card, so I'm just going to post that down the description box below. So, it's been something I've been doing ever since I started booking WCW 1998, so should be self explanatory. And hopefully, judging by that card alone, it should be enough for viewers to get their money's worth. Hopefully, there aren't any pay per view cutoff feeds, which was a common criticism from this pay per view, and not try to get carried away too much with the high profile matches. So, without further ado, we're just going to kick things off with a Cruiserweight title defense. So, Rey Mysterio Jr. going in as the champion, defending the belt against Billy Kidman. So, Mysterio has been holding that Cruiserweight title belt as far back as Bash at the Beach, coming back from his knee injury that sidelined him throughout the first half of '98. But, Mysterio ends up coming back at the July pay per view and winning the Cruiserweight title the same night of his return. And on the other hand, you also have Billy Kidman, who had represented Raven and his flock, and by this point, Raven's flock had disbanded thanks to Raven's firing from WCW programming. So now the flock have branched out into their own. Billy Kidman's doing his own thing, and he's been growing a fan base ever since breaking away from the flock. So he's winning a lot of matches and getting to the point where J.J. Dillon, who was the WCW commissioner at this time, does an evaluation of the cruiserweight division, looking over their win-loss records and to see which particular wrestler will be contending for the cruiserweight title. So the board committee looks over the booking committee specifically, and J.J. Dillon announces that, judging from his win-loss record, he's proudly announced to have Billy Kidman to take on Rey Mysterio as the number one contender to face him at Halloween Havoc. So so the match is set: Mysterio versus Kidman, and this should really be a very star-studded match, especially the way to kick off the show. And if you watch some of the Kidman Mysterio matches in the actual WCW, a lot of them were really well delivered. And I want to try and continue on Rey Mysterio, since he's been hot on fire since coming back, and Halloween Havoc has been kind of a track record for Rey Mysterio's performance in wrestling matches. So should really I can't really see him disappoint, and just really try to pull out all the stops. And the same goes for Billy Kidman as well. And this is going to be a lot of high spots and a lot of fast-paced action, which you would expect for a cruiserweight title match. And at the end of the day, Billy Kidman will walk out as the new cruiserweight champion. So he's going to nail this shooting star press on Rey Mysterio to get the 1-2-3. So Billy Kidman is your new cruiserweight champion. So that's my first match. Second match will consist of a tag team match of the Dark Carnival taking on the Faces of Fear. There isn't going to be too much build up necessarily, but the announcers would try to put it over that these are two tag teams known for their supernatural characteristics. And the Dark Carnival has been, recently formed around this time, and they've been consistently winning matches. And the Faces of Fear also start to take notice. Jimmy Hart's still managing Megan Barbarian, and they earlier that year they've been tag team champions at one point, and eventually, not too long ago, they lost the belts. So really try to put over Dark Carnival specifically, but also making the Faces of Fear at least look strong. And it wouldn't be a long match, so Vampiro and La Parca will go over the Faces of Fear. So this should be a very interesting dynamic, especially since those two teams also have their respective managers to accompany their teams. Then we have is Eddie Guerrero versus Chavo Guerrero. So this is a battle between uncle versus nephew. So Eddie and Chavo, they've been together for most of 1998, although Chavo isn't really fond of Eddie Guerrero and the way that he's been treating him. And this kind of gets under his skin. So it's been boiling for several months. And uh, what the big turning point is, Eddie Guerrero earns that number one contender spot from Road Wild where he won the Cruiserweight Open. So he would go to Fall Brawl to face Rey Mysterio for the Cruiserweight title. And there's been occasions where Eddie Guerrero looks like he could have had the match won. But at some point, Chavo Guerrero, there's like some sort of a miscommunication going on, a little bit of a ref distraction that kind of backfires, and the miscommunication that they would have would end up having Rey Mysterio take the advantage and win he'll win the match and retain the Cruiserweight title. And Eddie Guerrero is just very distraught at Chavo Guerrero because of his involvement and accidentally costing Eddie Guerrero the match. So it's just been a rocky road for those two. And eventually Eddie Guerrero just goes out on a rampage on Chavo, taking out his frustrations. So this is going to lead to a match at Halloween Havoc. And this should really be a very solid to really great match. And just given an estimation as to how long this match would go, somewhere between 10 to 12 minutes, maybe a little more, depending on how big of the rivalry that Eddie and Chavo have. And they've actually had some really good matches in actuality. So if you give them the same amount of time like you did at the pay-per-views that they had, I believe it was like Great American Bash and Bash at the Beach. So they've had two series of matches. And so Chavo Guerrero is going to go over Eddie Guerrero. So it's going to be a pretty big winning upset. So Eddie Guerrero does the Black Tiger Bomb around this time. And Chavo Guerrero out of nowhere just counters it into a sunset flip roll up, allowing him to pick up the victory. Eddie Guerrero isn't very fond of the loss and attacks Chavo Guerrero from behind, and the security will come out and try to restrain Eddie Guerrero, and just basically giving an excuse that the feud is going to continue. So to kind of give a little bit of a sign, judging from that post-match altercation. So Chavo Guerrero for the victory. Then we have is a television title defense between Chris Jericho defending the belt against Disco Inferno. So not much build up necessarily, but to also kind of give Chris Jericho an opponent. And Disco Inferno's also been a former television champion himself. So I think Disco Inferno, basically what we would do here is that Chris Jericho would cut a bit of a promo prior to the match about how disco music sucks and how Disco Inferno is just living in the past. He's out of touch. And Disco Inferno is just very offensive from Chris Jericho's disparaging remarks. And this kind of stems into that match. Wouldn't necessarily be dragged on for too long. So despite Disco's efforts, Chris Jericho will come out on top. Then we have is a tag team title defense between Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko going as the champions, and they're taking on Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. So basically, it's been over a year since the Outsiders lost the tag title belts, and a pretty controversial way because in the same match that they lost the tag title belts, Kevin Nash wasn't around to defend the belts with Scott Hall, so in reality, they had him replace it with Six, and the Steiner brothers ended up winning the tag title belts that way. And the Outsiders kind of feel cheated. And if you might remember, there was a time where Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came out with like fake replicas of the tag team title belts. So they're gonna keep those fake tag title belts that they had throughout most of that year, and saying that they're the real tag team champions and that Benoit and Malenko just don't know who they're dealing with. And basically along the way you have Benoit and Malenko befriending Arn Anderson, and basically Benoit and Malenko will convince Arn Anderson about bringing back the Four Horsemen, and more importantly, bringing back Ric Flair in order to uh, make the whole reunion work. And sort of like what they were doing towards the tail end of the summer going into the fall. And it's just been, Dean Malenko and Benoit have been playing up on Arn Anderson for several weeks and even over a month now. And Arn Anderson's trying to give as much thought as he possibly can. So he's currently contemplating for a while, and the outsiders are willing to take the tag title belts that they feel that they never truly lost, that they feel cheated out of the belts. And that's kind of how you would set up the tag team championship bout. So on one hand, you also have Vincent, who will accompany the outsiders, while Arn Anderson accompanies Benoit and Malenko. So to kind of make it even out the match. And there'll be occasions where the outsiders look like they're going to have Benoit and Malenko beat. And eventually, Vincent, who's accompanied the outsiders at ringside, will slip in one of the tag team title belts. So Vincent's going to try and play a part in the match, and Arn Anderson's going to do what he can to uh, kind of keep it straight down the middle. Scott Hall tries to go for the championship belt, looks to hit one of Benoit and Malenko, but eventually accidentally hits Kevin Nash. So this allows either Benoit and Malenko to get the pinfall to retain the tag team title belts. Moving on, we're going to have a ultimate endurance match between Bret Hart and Sting. Now you may ask yourself what exactly is an ultimate endurance match. So basically, due to trademark issues with WWE, so this is basically WCW's version of an Iron Man match. So you have two wrestlers going one on one, and whoever scores the most points at the end of the time limit will overall win the match. And pinfalls, submissions, DQs, countouts will apply during this match. And Sting and Bret Hart had been going at it for a couple months now. Sting and Bret had their first encounter at Slamboree with the world title belt up for grabs. Sting went over Bret Hart, and along the way, their sportsmanship, their respect for each other has slowly deteriorated as the months go by. So Sting and Bret Hart had a few series of matches on Nitro here and there. Most of the time, their matches either ended time limit draws or a DQ interference from Raven's Flock or the NWO. So they never really had a chance to truly finish off their rematch. So eventually, those two wrestlers were in the triangle match along with Hogan at Road Wild, and Hogan ended up coming out on top and winning back the World Heavyweight title. Sting and Bret Hart, ever since then, have been blaming each other for the reasons why the WCW World title belt is no longer in their clutches once again. And, they have to team up in the War Games match, but even then, Sting and Bret Hart just seem to coexist very well. But they're doing their best to try to fend off the NWO and doing what they can to put their differences aside. So Team WCW would go over the NWO. Bret Hart feels that he should be the number one contender for Hulk Hogan's title belt since he felt that he should have won War Games, but finds out that DDP ends up racking up that victory with a pinfall, and this kind of really leaves Bret Hart a bit, I want to say, jealous. I was thinking about maybe something else, um, but Bret Hart's just infuriated, and he should be the one going after Hogan and saying that if it wasn't for me, you Sting would never have held the world title. This kind of culminates into a match at Halloween Havoc where they determine who, just to kind of determine who the winner take all to really wrap up this whole rivalry that's been going on throughout the summer. So, yeah, they did the match at Halloween Havoc in reality, but I thought I'd give it a little bit of a different spin by adding a stipulation for this match. So, yeah, hopefully it should be really good, and given the amount of time and really pulling out all the stops. Chris Jericho and Jim Neidhart will play a part in interfering in the match. The announcers aren't really sure why they're interfering in the match, but it kind of gets to a point where Bret Hart just has some tricks up his sleeve. and this will allow Bret Hart to go over Sting by collecting the most points. Um, I guess you could do something very similar to Bret and Shawn from WrestleMania 12, where the Iron Man match would end uh, like in a no contest, like they're both their scores are tied, and then they have to redo the match, and the match resumes, and then you could have Jericho and Jim Neidhart come out on cue and interfere in the match. So yeah, so Bret Hart's gonna go over Sting. Then we have is Ric Flair taking on Eric Bischoff. So this has been a pretty anticipated bout for quite some time. It's been nearly over a year since Ric Flair. We've seen him on WCW TV, and basically, like I was discussing a little bit earlier about how Benoit and Malenko have been kind of going into Arn Anderson and encouraging him to bring Ric Flair back to WCW, bring back the Four Horsemen. I mean, it's been over a year since he disbanded them, and he feels that this is the time that this at one point in time that the Horsemen used to be the top stable in WCW, and just the way they just went out just was very dissatisfying. So eventually, the weeks progress. A month has passed. Ric Flair eventually makes a decision via like a phone interview or something, and Ric Flair is going to come back to WCW programming. However, under one condition. So Eric Bischoff eventually Eric Bischoff would come out and announce that his WCW contract has long since expired, and that the only way he could return is if he starts aligning himself with the NWO. But Ric Flair just declines all this. It says that he remembers what happened at the War Games, where the NWO ended up destroying, damaging his head and slamming him on the cage door, and every time that he watches that footage, it just haunts him. It's just giving him nightmares. So this in turn kills any dignity and passion that he once had for the sport. J.J. Dillon addresses the issue, so he basically sanctions the match for Halloween Havoc, so stating that if Ric Flair wins, he gets a chance to renew his contract with WCW, but however, if Bischoff wins, Flair must side with the NWO regardless of his heated rivalry and differences towards Bischoff. So they have a match. This would be kind of a way to kind of cool off the Bret Hart Sting match, and yeah, basically Ric Flair is going to go over Eric Bischoff in his first pay-per-view match return, and there's going to be a bit of interference from the NWO, but then you also have Benoit and Malenko coming out to help Ric Flair, and Flair's going to lock in the figure four on Eric Bischoff to win the match. So, yeah, so this is definitely Ric Flair's anticipated return, and now he's back. He's signed with WCW, and who knows? Is he going to reunite the Horsemen? So that's going to be kind of a question where the viewers will have to tune in the next night on Nitro. And then we have is the last two matches here, and one of those two matches would consist of Goldberg taking on the Warrior. Yeah, so Ultimate Warrior, or it's just simply the Warrior for copyright reasons. Yeah, so Warrior ends up substituting the Giant in the War Games match, and Team WCW ends up coming out on top. And Ultimate Warrior just talking about how Goldberg just reminds him of what he used to be and why he at one point he was a very successful wrestler, that the Ultimate Warrior is very interested in fighting Goldberg. Goldberg accepts the challenge. And this is kind of more of an old school versus new generation dynamic we're going here. So Goldberg's going to go over the Ultimate Warrior. And since Warrior's not going to stick around for very long, and Goldberg's really hot during this time, so it's definitely going to be a big sign things to come for Goldberg. And this victory will really enhance Goldberg and continuing his winning streak and whatnot. And then we also have is the World Heavyweight title belt up for grabs. So Hulk Hogan defends the belt against Diamond Dallas Page. Yeah, so this means I'm taking away Goldberg and DDP, unfortunately. So I really enjoyed that match for what it was, but given the circumstances of my booking, so I kind of flip-flopped certain wrestlers around. So instead of Hogan versus Warrior, it's Goldberg Warrior, and instead of Goldberg DDP, it's DDP Hogan. So Yeah, so I mean, it wouldn't be as up to par as Goldberg DDP, but it would be at least tolerable compared to the disaster that was Hogan versus Warrior. So I'm gonna try and keep DDP busy, but also keep Hogan busy as well. DDP won that War Games match for WCW, and basically earning that number one contender shot against Hogan for the World Heavyweight Title. So that's how we set it up. I like that. And along the way, there's been kind of a bit of a rift within the NWO, and the NWO ends up blaming Hulk Hogan for the reason why they lost the match, and basically Hogan's just been more about himself, and the NWO are starting to really realize this, and especially with Kevin Nash being the more vocal member of the group. So yeah, so Hulk Hogan's pretty much on his own, and they're sick and tired of having to help Hogan fight their battles for him all the time. So to kind of really keep his title reign a little more of a stark contrast from his previous title reign since starting up the NWO. Hulk Hogan's pretty much his own man. JJ Dillon issues the stipulation that if any NWO member interferes in the match, then not only will Hogan be disqualified, but also he would be stripped out of the World Heavyweight Championship belt. DDP nails the diamond cutter on Hogan, tries to go for a cover, and then Bret Hart comes out, interferes in the match, attacks DDP. The referee will there will likely be a ref bump, so this kind of gives an excuse for why Bret Hart interferes with the match without being disqualified. But then again, it wouldn't really matter since Bret Hart's not even in the NWO anyway. So JJ Dillon wasn't as clear as we all thought he would be. So yeah, so getting back, Bret Hart's involvement will allow Hulk Hogan going for a leg drop. 1, 2, 3. Hulk Hogan retains the World Heavyweight Title. Um, so that's how we close out the match, and as well as Halloween Havoc in general. So yeah, so let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Tell me what you all thought about the card. Stay tuned as I book the November pay-per-view World War III, so stick around for that. And until next time, this is Gold Standard User 924 signing out.